is difficult when there's been so much trauma within our community, when there hasn't been enough, I guess, quote unquote, healing. And I think that a lot of us are on 10. I mean, to some extent, you could say a lot of us are walking around with some level of PTSD on a continuum, if we wanted to put that on a spectrum. And we're so guarded and we're looking for the next person to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. Today, I really don't want to do a soliloquy. I just want to just get off here, tell you, bartender, cue the music, and go on about the day because it's Friday. So that's what I'm going to do. Thank you for tuning into the Mind of a Man podcast, where Bush Counseling Services does take breaks. Every now and then, we do. So without further ado, let the manversation begin. Bartender, cue the music!
Welcome to the Mind of a Man podcast. A podcast where men have manversations on topics they rarely discuss, such as health, family, and wealth, to name a few. Now, here's your host, James Bush.
What's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to the Mind of a Man podcast. I am your host, James Bush, your manversationist. Today, we got a special guest. Special not in the sense of what you were talking about in second and third grade, but cool people. Sierra Hillsman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, James. James, I like that. The manversationist. I'm like, how can I spin that? I love it.
Sierra, I'm about to burn you in probably about maybe segment 1. So you might want to hold off that praise just for right now. All right.
Okay.
Because we got something to talk about being left out. But anyway, Sierra, give us a little background on who you are, how you got started in all this.
Definitely. So my name is Sierra Hillsman. I'm a licensed professional counselor, certified clinical trauma professional, and national certified counselor. I started off in the hospital setting, so partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient, transitioned into inpatient, and now I'm currently in residential substance abuse treatment facilities, also dabbling in private practice as well. So based upon my background, just been all over the place in the mental health field. How I got started is just my personal love for the field. I originally was not supposed to be a mental health therapist. I thought I was going to grow up to become a speech language pathologist. I thought I was going to work with kids who struggled with hearing issues and whatnot, until I decided to have a postgraduate crisis. I graduated with 2 degrees, psychology and communication sciences and disorders. And I didn't know what to do because nobody was hiring at the time. So I decided to move to Atlanta, try something new. And I ended up in the mental health field after my father went inpatient for depression. He was suicidal and homicidal. And so I saw the need for mental health within communities of color. I thought I was going to enroll into my clinical mental health counseling program with the concept of becoming a mental health advocate. I wanted to acquire the information, create trainings, go back into communities like myself that I grew up in, Black and Brown communities. And then I saw the need for representation for Black and Brown clinicians of color. So that's how I ended up in this field.
Basically, what you're telling me is, like I've heard from so many others, you didn't choose the field chose you.
Listen, okay, that is 100%, 100%.
Definitely. Okay, so Sierra, I'm a little unconventional. Sierra, so should I say legacy speaks? No, I like Sierra better. So
okay.
I'm a little unconventional, and I like to start off with the game in the beginning. Why? Because I just do. Now, this is game time. Game time is basically when I pretty much harass my guests and try to throw random questions out of history and trivia to them in hopes that they may get all of them wrong, so that I can pretty much hold it over their head for, I don't know, a temporary period of time. So, if you do get them all right, you will be rewarded with the Mind of a Man podcast.
Okay.
You ready?
Ready.
Okay, question number 1. Who perfected the first American revolver?
Oh my goodness, that is the worst question to ask me. Oh, I honestly do not know. I'm going to say that.
You're in the South, Sierra. You're in the South.
Okay, but I'm a South Floridian. Okay, I do not. I do not subscribe to these Southern ways. So. I'm just gonna tell you right then and there. I don't know.
I don't know. Well, the answer is Samuel Colt. Well, no swag for you. Question number 2. A group of apes is called what?
Oh my word. A colony? I don't know.
No, it is called shrewdness. Definitely no swag for you. Question number 3. What is the national flower of Wales?
Where do you get these questions from?
I get them from somewhere, Sierra.
Oh my word. National flower of Wales. Let's say a lily. I'm not sure.
No, actually, it is the daffodil.
Oh.
Okay, Sierra. You know what? I don't. Let's do this. Question number 4. What does a philologist study?
Philologist.
I know you got this.
I might break it down. But like your digits, like your fingers and.
No, Sierra. They study language.
You mean a phonologist, not a philologist?
No, philologist. Philologist.
Got it.
Languages. Now, last question. Question number 5. Where was Sierra Hillsman born?
Fort Lauderdale, Florida. All day.
All right. So now that is out the way, no swag for you, but
okay.
Let's get into, man, some definitely great work that you've been doing. I stumbled upon my project manager, Erin. She stumbled upon you. She said about this conference that you were doing, and it's mental wellness for the culture. And when I was looking at it, I said, you had a lot of individuals, helpers in the field, and you brought them all together, and it was a great thing to see. The unpleasant moment was my name wasn't included in that. That's all right. But to bring that many different minds together in order to help educate our community, I think is a very fascinating thing. And sometimes I believe it's very difficult to do at times because with schedules, egos, and everything that comes along with that. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I started Mental Wellness for the Culture Conference in 2020 when we were all experiencing the pandemic. Obviously, when it comes to mental health resources, they're already limited in nature, but imagine trying to manage your mental health and wellness in the face of potentially losing your job, in the face of like not having access to maybe even a computer or a laptop, or maybe even struggling to just get out of bed because of all the changes and transitions. And so when I first had it in 2020, it was amazing. I had a little under 300 registrants and attendees, and I was just super grateful for the outpour. And I started off with primarily individuals within the state of Georgia. One thing that I appreciated when I became a mental health counselor in the field is the support of those who came before me. And so anytime I needed some assistance or maybe even like words of wisdom or whatever like that, or maybe even support in any of my endeavors, I was able to tap in on those individuals. And so the whole premise of Mental Wellness for the Culture Conference is to, one, increase accessibility to mental health care. Oftentimes, a lot of individuals struggle with being able to find the right counselor. And the reason why I use like air quotes is because everybody thinks that they can find the right person, whether it's the right relationship, the right job, or whatever. But I like to showcase that we are out here. Like Black and Brown clinicians are really out here, whether you are a licensed professional counselor, a licensed mental health counselor, licensed clinical social worker, whatever your credentials are, we are readily available. Yes, the insurance may kind of sway your decision or the proximity or whatever the case may be, but we are out here and we're ready to serve. And so I just love to showcase the gifts and talents of fellow clinicians. And I love the fact that like other clinicians are willing to provide those expertise or like their services in a way that is up to date and modern and fresh, instead of the whole archaic way of thinking, like thinking that, okay, therapy is only for the couch. No, therapy looks like community advocacy. It looks like going into schools after to engage in after school programs. It looks like being able to like develop new and innovative ways to introduce what therapy looks like. And so that's what Mental Wellness for the Culture Conference is all about.
I mean, I definitely think that's so dope. If anybody's heard me speak before, when we were as African Americans on this continent, when we were in slavery or so, when we were going through Jim Crow and the Civil Rights era, when we went through the crack epidemic and all those type of things, whose couch were we sitting on? You know,
exactly.
We weren't sitting on anybody's
couch. Don't get me
couch.
started, James. Please don't get me started.
We weren't.
I'm currently reading this book by Bell Hooks, where it says "Rock My Soul," and it's just talking about like African American and self-esteem. And the thing that I really appreciated about her was just the fact that she identified the need for us to invest as Black people, invest in our psyche. Like nobody pulled us to the side and said, how are you dealing with the integration? Like, whereas before we were like very isolated and we were together, very communal in nature. And then like, as we started integrating, how are you dealing with that? Dealing with the racism in your face? How are you dealing with like being told that your features are ugly, but then turning around, seeing white people getting all these lip plumpers and all this stuff like that? Like, how are you dealing with that? And sometimes with us in trauma as people of color, we like to avoid it, or we like to deny it, or we like to disassociate from it. And so I love this whole movement that we are in terms of like increasing holistic wellness, not only like the body and the spirit, but mental, spiritual, financial, all of that stuff. Like that's important.
I think that was so important. Well, first and foremost, Bell Hooks is someone that I quote unquote met in my freshman year at Fisk University. And I ain't never been the same since. That woman's something else. But anyway, when it comes to the idea of holistic wellness, I think that the Black church kind of has helped promote that. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because when we started to find out that eating chicken and fish fries and then going and lay down on them after service was not healthy and not helpful, we started to say, look, we got to do something different, because the devil didn't cause this damn cancer. You know, it's like you did. Or when we went and pretty much shot our credit up to the point where it is a negative 200 credit score, and then we're praying to see if we can buy a home or so. The devil didn't do that. It was you and not paying your bills on time. And so I definitely am embracing this whole era of, you know, the holistic ideation. Why? Because it's so needed, or so like that. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. And because of that, we're not progressing and conquering and taking the places where we need to be, that will be effective for generations to come.
I definitely agree. Even the concept of integrating spirituality with the mental health component, like all that you mentioned, is recognizing like faith without works is dead. And so understanding that, okay, yes, you can have faith that God can heal you in these aspects, but you also need to do the work. And doing the work looks like going to therapy, or maybe even finding a yoga practice, or increasing mindfulness, journaling, taking that PTO and those vacation days. That's what doing the work looks like.
Sierra, non-legacy speak. You got a devil if you go see that therapist. Don't go talk to that therapist or that psychologist. They're going to do something to your head. I remember that stuff about around 2000s and before, or so like that.
Yeah.
I remember all of that very vividly, and it's very funny and ironic to see the place that we're in right now. So, I mean, definitely, it's definitely something.
And even with that, I think about like the scripture that talks about a nation without counsel will fall. And so like we as people, we're going to use the Bible, read the whole Bible, cover to cover now, because it's there.
Definitely. So let's get to my next point. And as we're talking about culture and community, my question to you, and as I in our prep for this, is where are we as Black men, as Black women, as minority? Where are we? Because if you look at social media, we're so divided. We don't like
Mm,
each other. I mean, we're
yeah.
we're tearing at each other at 1 minute. We've got one guy over here, and don't get me wrong, Kevin Samuels has opened a conversation that probably needed to be had, or so like that.
Mm,
But then there's the other conversations that come on that are opposed to that, or so, and it's just chirping back and forth, and it's like, how does that help us move forward? House divided against itself can't stand, and so now
thank
we're
you.
looking at what we're doing, and it's just like, dude, this is stupid.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on that, Sierra?
Well, for one, I always like to remind people that as Black people, we are
Mm-hmm,
not monolithic, right? So,
mm-hmm,
understandably, just because we have the same skin color doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same experience. And I always
true.
remind people of that, especially when they're looking for clinicians of color.
Yeah.
Just because we look the same, it doesn't mean that we have the same experience. I think we as a people need to look at each other with empathy, but also recognizing that there are like intersectionalities in the midst of our differences. And rather than focusing on the minor things, looking at the bigger picture, I think one thing that we lack as a people in comparison to other races or minorities, whether it's like Jewish or Asian Pacific Islanders or maybe even Latinos, is that like we tend to stray away from our communal ways of being, only to take on like the more Eurocentric approach, the individualism. One thing that I always encourage people is that like in order for you to take care of the we, you also need to take care of the I,
Mm-hmm,
especially with mental health. Especially for us, we have a tendency of uh, taking on so many different loads
mm-hmm.
rather than trying to figure out how can we designate certain particular tasks to other individuals. So I think for us to have that healthy conversation, we need to first be able to be in a place to listen to one another and not just listen to defend, but listen to get to a common solution.
That's very difficult. And I mean, and this is going to go into our next segment, which I don't want to get too ahead of, but
Mhm.
it's difficult when there's been so much trauma within our
Yeah.
community, when there hasn't
Mhm.
been enough, I guess, quote unquote, healing. And I think that a lot of us are on 10. I mean, to some extent, you could say a lot of us are walking around with some level of PTSD on a continuum,
Mhm.
if we wanted to put that on a spectrum. And we're so guarded, and we're looking for the next person to do X, Y, and Z. It's funny because when you look at people that are trying to get their car fixed, and they ask, who's going to fix my car? Am I going to take it to an Asian individual, Caucasian individual, African American individual? Oh, no, 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 no. I ain't talking to that Black. Wow.
Yeah.
There's already this disposition towards our culture being ASE certified.
Yeah.
And that's that,
Definitely.
and that goes into so much when it talks about African American Black economics and the Black dollar and where it go, and it's just a mindset, a lot of that, man, that is happening, and it's pretty much, it's polluting, man, our culture right now, because we don't trust each other, because of
Yeah.
some of the
I,
things that have happened.
a huge part of it is learning to value the culture, right? Like,
Mhm.
even when we talk about doing things for the culture, well, what components of the culture do you appreciate? Do you truly value? What beliefs did you grow up with? Who influenced you to see your culture the way that you see it?
Who
What
hurt
does
you?
your yeah, essentially,
I'm
who
sorry.
hurt you, but not only that, who helped you,
Oh, I
right?
love that. I love that. Who helped you? Damn, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think even when we're talking about trauma informed care, we're thinking about the R's, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so realizing that what may be traumatic for you may not be traumatic for me, recognizing that trauma shows up in different ways, shape, forms, or fashions, and then responding to that matter in an empathetic way, but also responding to it in a manner that has resources that are applicable to my particular situation and concerns, and then avoiding re traumatization. That's so important as well. And so when oftentimes we think about like, what's your problem? What's your issue? When you got something going on, da, 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 let's take a moment. What happened to you? Because maybe what happened to you might have happened to me. And now we're having this elevated experience, this shared experience. And like, it's just like, okay, well, we both agree that we don't like this pain. Let's figure out what's the next step to not only end our pain, but also heal so that the next generation doesn't have to experience this as well.
And I think a lot of that, what you just stated, when it comes to empathy, I think that comes with information. Our culture has to be educated and informed to things that are beyond their four corners or beyond their streets or beyond their boulevard or even beyond their mindsets. To be able to empathize with someone and understand the experience that they are undergoing, you have to have some level of understanding to say, that, okay, yeah, even though that doesn't affect me, but for them, I can see that,
Yeah.
and
Even
go ahead.
Oh, I was like, not only the understanding, but the willingness to understand.
Yes,
That
yes,
is key.
yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing because when you make that decision that, okay, I'm going to be empathic in this moment with this person or so, and I'm going to choose to step in this pit with them and look at it from their point of view. Yeah, this is jacked up. you know, this is crazy. Okay,
Yeah.
how are we going to get out of here? How are we going to do better in this moment? Yeah, I would. I mean, sometimes, I mean, granted, some people, they don't agree with me or so like that. But when I'm working with kids who are suffering from substance abuse, or they're smoking vast amounts of marijuana, or they're popping pills or anything like that, and then when you start to look into some of their backgrounds, when they've had multiple parents that are incarcerated, they've had trauma, gunshot wounds, GSWs. They've had malice and all kinds of carnage that's happened in their local communities, somewhat similar to a war. Then you say, I probably smoke with you as well. How many blunts do
That
you smoke a
part.
day? How many blunts do you smoke a day? You probably aren't doing enough. I probably would smoke as well because that's heavy. Oh, yes. And by the way, when it comes to managed care, when it comes to insurance and getting the necessary help that you need,
Listen,
man,
let's go. Let's talk about that. Because even then, when I think about and all those ACEs that you talk about, for your listeners who don't know what ACEs are, adverse childhood
childhood experiences.
experiences, like people forget that when it comes to managed care, you also have to be mindful that you have to find a clinician within that network, or you pay up front and then you get reimbursed. You have your super bills and all this stuff like that. And then on the flip side too, trying to, depending on where you live, you may not have a clinician within that area. So when we're talking about mental health care, it's not just equality, it's also the equity, the accessibility, leveling the playing field to make sure that these resources are readily available for our communities. And if they're not readily available, how can we make that happen? How can we as a culture create these systems for ourselves? I think that's what, going back to our conversation about understanding, having the willingness to understand, having the willingness to educate yourself on these matters. And then once you have that information, let's take off and run with it. I really hate when we have like these conversations and these summits and these these places of learning. It's just like, oh, I'm so full with all information. Okay, go forth and prosper. What are you doing to advance the well-being of your community with this information?
You're proverbially placing the conference flyer right next to the vision board that has papers browned and curled up that have not been met within the last 4 or 5 years of your life. I mean, it goes in all the great thoughts and everything. They just go and they die on your bookshelf, pretty much. And that's unfortunate. But again, I think that it's very important that we start to find other resources in our communities. And I know it's one of those things where people, they say, we got to stick together. I mean, yeah, but it starts with the individual. What are you doing about it? What are you doing about reaching out to different resources? And again, that comes with mindset. That comes with availing and opening yourself to try something different, try something new. That comes with sometimes taking a risk. That comes with sometimes being comfortable, becoming comfortable, being uncomfortable to some extent. Why? Because that's where the exploration comes in. That's where the newness. If we continue to do the same things, we're going to get the same results. And it's not on anyone else. It's not on the Caucasian. It's not on the other individuals. It's on us at the end of the day. At this point, there are no victims. It's just us at that moment. And I think that we have to be more intentional about executing in this day and age.
Even when you were talking about that, I was thinking about this book that I read by George Fraser. It was talking about Black networking, the power of Black networking.
Mhm.
And so, yes, let's stick together as a community, but don't be afraid to go into other communities and learn that information so that we can take it back and implement it, plant those seeds in our own communities. So yes, let's stick together. Let's be communal and do what we got to do. But you see other cultures move into other different countries, learning their information, gathering like little, I want to say like little spies or whatever, but like little, like little sponges, right? And so why can't we go into different domains, become sponges, and bring that information back to our communities so that we can prosper?
So Sierra, my final thoughts on this second segment, that is the bickering, the infighting, the garbage that exists between our people right now. Do you see it siphoning off? Is it ever going to get any better? Or are we just going to be this way for the next 15 to 20 years with, groups such as MGTOW, Men Go Their Own Way, feminist groups, extreme feminism, and radical feminism, and everything above with that? Will it ever get any better, do you believe?
The optimist in me wants to believe that it'll get better. Will it end immediately? No, but I feel like our communication will become better. Our ability to remain insightful, to have healthy dialogue and conversation. I think as we continue to heal individually as both man and female, or like non-gender or non-binary, as we continue to become more aware of our triggers and our warning signs, we're able to come to the table and have healthy dialogue and conversations, and things will get better eventually.
The key word is as we begin to heal.
Yes.
As we begin to heal, eventually.
Eventually.
Let's take a quick break. Mind of a Man podcast.
The Mind of a Man podcast was brought to you by Bush Counselling Services, where we don't merely advise our clients, we accompany them on their journey to realise the life they desired. Look us up at bushcounselingservices.com. That's bushcounselingservices.com.
And we're back, Mind of a Man podcast. So, Sierra, segment 3. I don't know about, maybe it was within this year, I will say, that you put a blurb, reel, video, whatever you want to call it these days, out on Instagram, and you were talking about the power of thoughts. And I won't say I was moved, because a lot of people say, like, a pastor in the church said he was moved, but it caught my attention. I'll say that. And it kind of brought me back to where we used to talk about in school, where cognitive behavioral therapy, for those who don't know, is particular practice. And one of the tenets is change the thought, change the action. And so I want you to talk a little bit about sometimes how our thoughts influence our actions, and how we can work to, I don't want to say redo them, reuse them, change them, move them, but how we can alter them to have more effective and better outcomes.
Definitely. So one, thank you for saying that. If anybody wants to look at that or watch it, you can see it on my YouTube channel, Legacy Speaks, or you can also go to Legacy Speaks podcast for that particular episode. I believe it's episode 1, managing anxiety for entrepreneurs. But when I explain the CBT concept, I use a triangle, and I remind people that each point represents your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. And regardless of wherever you start off in that triangle, they influence one another. So you can have a feeling, it influences your behavior, and then you can turn around and have a thought, or you can have a thought and it influences your feelings, and then both. Wherever you start off, that's where it's going to show how everything is heavily integrated. And so I encourage people to be mindful of their thoughts or their thinking patterns, especially the patterns, because if this thought shows up, how often have you thought like this previously before? And what triggers these particular thoughts? And that's why we were in our previous conversation about being mindful of your triggers and healing and stuff like that. Let's start with what we're experiencing right now and work backwards. It's so important for us to capture our thoughts because they heavily influence not only the way we see ourselves, but the way that we interact with the universe, the way that we project ourselves onto other people, how we actually show up. And we have to learn how to reframe our perspectives. That way we can learn how to self-actualize, which is to become the best versions of ourselves. You literally, when we wake up in the morning, what is the first thing that you think about? And how does that influence the trajectory of the rest of your day? And if you find yourself hitting some type of obstacle or maybe even like some moment of distress, what do you have in your resiliency toolkit to help you overcome those thoughts? So those are just a couple of things that I help clients work on.
It's funny because, man, when you were talking about that, it just, I don't know, sometimes my mind just goes all over the place. And that Jasmine, I think it was a Jasmine Sullivan song, was it's Pick Up Your Feelings or something like that.
Yes.
and I was thinking about the triangle, and I'm CV triangle, and I was like, wow, that does work. And then, it's just get out your feelings, pick up your feelings or so. And I think it's so important because fellas, well, I don't want to curse, not today, but our feelings will play us at times if we allow them to. They will play us. They will take us down to places that are not necessary. They will have us in those shiny little bracelets when they don't need to be, and it's unfortunate. That's why sometimes it becomes imperative that we master the individual within, that we find ways to utilize what Sierra was talking about, the resiliency toolkit. Find ways of understanding what are my triggers, what are some of the things that set me off, who are, and guess what? It's funny because sometimes they got these memes on social media right now, a bunch of red flags, so like that.
Yes.
And so sometimes we wouldn't want to go through my contacts list. I'm saying, you're a red flag, you're a red flag, you're a red flag, you didn't even open your mouth, but you are to me, and you trigger me. So I need to stay the hell away from you. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's called emotional intelligence. It's becoming self-aware of who you are, and then how being who you are affects other individuals, and having the understanding about that. If you don't get that concept, you will walk aimlessly around, possibly being triggered and set on fire by other individuals, and they will watch you burn. And that's unfortunate, guys, because again, we're wanting to be leaders. We want to do better than our grandparents, than our parents. And now we're armed with the information, and we have these nice little computers in our hands that we can do such. But it starts with us. Again, there are no victims in this conversation. It's just victors.
And I also want, because oftentimes I see how there are certain words in the mental health field that are so trendy, like self-care and triggered. I want you to be super honest with yourself. There's a difference between being triggered and being offended. And so whatever it is that you are experiencing, especially in the substance abuse space, we say principles before personalities, learning to separate the personality from the individual, recognizing that probably whatever is offending you, you might also see in yourself. So maybe if you start healing that inner person, like you mentioned, controlling that inner person, you won't be as easily offended or triggered to go towards those maladaptive ways of behavior, or maybe even ways of thinking and feeling.
It goes back to, I referenced this book on the show before, Simon Sinek says, what's your why? And why you do some of the things that you do. I'm going to use it in a different manner, but I like the concept. I like just the way the words flow off. And like, what is your why? Why do you want to go upside their head when they say X, Y, and Z to you? Why do you want to go and do this or that? You have to ask yourself. You have to do that deep dive. And so sometimes that deep dive comes when you get quiet, when you go to therapy, when you talk to trusted friends, you talk to trusted friends who are competent in certain areas of life. What is your why? Why do you continue to make the same mistakes? Or why do you even do some of the great things that you do? It's about self-exploration. There's a study out there that says maybe only 15% of individuals truly become self-aware in the United States. That's horrible.
Right. And And James, I greatly appreciate you highlighting that because people automatically assume that you have to go to a therapist to begin your self-exploration journey.
Mm-mm.
Self-exploration can come from reading books. It could come from YouTube University. It could come from listening to great podcasts like this. And so when you come across a piece of information or maybe some experience, strength, and hope or insight, take some time to just walk with it, to sit with that thing, and then take some opportunities to be able to ask yourself particular questions that allow you to deep dive. When you are frustrated, find ways to go, like to either take a walk or maybe hit that ride on your bike or maybe even grab a journal. So you don't necessarily need a therapist to self-explore. You can start that right in the here and now.
Definitely. So as we wrap up, Sierra, I want you to tell the wonderful listeners where they can find you at. Give them all your IGs, your pigeon accounts, your virtual accounts, your whatever.
Yeah. So, hey, y'all, once again, it's Sierra Hillsman, licensed professional counselor and founder of Legacy Speaks. You can find me at legacyspks.com. You can also find me on Instagram at legacyspks.com. I started Legacy Speaks on YouTube, so that channel is still there with all videos in relation to mental health and maybe even spiritual wellness and holistic wellness. So just go over to YouTube at Legacy Speaks, and everything is there. I also have the podcast, Legacy Speaks Podcast. So everything is readily available. Just hit me up on all of those platforms. And if at any point you're looking for therapeutic services, I am here in the state of Georgia, fully licensed. And so feel free to reach out on any of those platforms as well, and I'll shoot you an intake form. Yeah.
Definitely. Sierra, what's for lunch today?
Oh, what is for lunch? Some soup is for lunch today. Yeah.
Soup. I mean, I know.
You know when you haven't gone grocery shopping yet, and it's just like, dang, let me grab like the quickest thing that's in the cabinet. So, yes. Poor therapist self-care. Okay, but it's the weekend, so I'm about to go grocery shopping later.
It's the craziest thing as a therapist, or so. It's like we go and we pour into all these other individuals, or so, and then we go and nothing wrong with soup, but we're resolved to soup. All right, shout out to Sierra Hillsman, aka Legacy Speaks. It's a great episode. I was really digging when we were talking about just the culture, and do we even actually understand where we are at right now? How divided we are? Do we actually even get it? It's unfortunate because when I'm looking at a lot of the podcasts and the social media memes and postings or so, it doesn't pretty much promote a very positive image, which makes me echo back to those individuals who brought us over here on this continent. And like, you guys did a good job. You divided us. We're at war with one another consistently, centuries after the fact. And it's unfortunate. And I think the biggest thing that we have to do is we have to begin to have the will to understand. We got to change the way we think about these things. I think that's going to help us even more. That's going to help promote the wellness. That's going to build the cohesion, the collaborative efforts. One can't do it alone. But when we get brothers and sisters on board together, what would that look like overall? Something pretty amazing. Something that can't be trifled with. So whenever you go and you see the dismay, the carnage, and a lot of the other things that are happening in our communities, ask yourself if we were beginning to collaborate a lot earlier. If someone just said, hey, look, I'm going to take the time to try to understand it from your point of view. Did that particular event have to happen? Challenge yourself. Ask yourself. And whatever you see, did it have to happen? And then ask yourself another question. What could I have done better to help the situation? That's it. That's all I got for you today. Just food for thought. Once again, great episode. What's the word for today? Word for today. Philologist. Yeah, philologist. study of languages. Won't be using that one, but oh well.